Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining our session today. My name's Ed Pratt, and I'm with Tax 1099, and we are presenting this session along with Zoho Books in the hopes of bringing you some information that will help you as you're coming into your 1099 filing season. So I titled this presentation "Learning to Love 1099 Miscellaneous Forms." A little tongue-in-cheek, but hopefully you'll at least like them a little bit better than maybe you have in the past as you're working with them through Zoho Books and Tax 1099. We have a few objectives today that we want to cover as part of our session. We want to make sure that we're covering some of the basics of 1099 miscellaneous forms. Just a reminder for some of you, and maybe for some of you, a new thing that you might not be as familiar with. We'll look inside of Zoho Books and talk about managing vendors over there, and then we'll integrate Zoho Books over to Tax 1099 and manage 1099s inside of Tax 1099. So we're doing a quick introduction here as part of our agenda, and then we'll talk about that 1099 miscellaneous form. And I just remind me why I care, because a lot of our customers who are small business owners really only see this once a year. They don't even think about it most of the year. And so it is important to kind of refresh your memory on why it's important to have the 1099 miscellaneouses processed correctly, the vendors set up and the payments correctly, and all that managed appropriately for your company. So we're going to talk a little bit about that and why it's important. We'll talk about some penalties and deadlines and things like that. Where do I go in Zoho Books? We're going to look specifically at Zoho Books to see where you are going to locate your vendors, your payments, your bills, all that inside of the tool. We're going to look at creating the 1099 miscellaneous forms and what goes into that, what you need to be on the lookout for, and then what else you can do after the 1099 miscellaneous forms are created. There are some additional features and functions that you may find useful inside of Tax 1099 for working with your 1099s and your vendors. And then at the end, hopefully we'll have some time for some Q&A at the end of the process. All right, so this is me. I'm Ed Pratt, again, with Tech Atlantis. We do software for primarily taxes, and one of our major products is Tax 1099. And we bring the tool together so that organizations large and small can use our tool to provide 1099 miscellaneous forms to their vendors and recipients. Just a quick disclaimer, so everything that's in here is good, solid information. However, individual circumstances may vary, and we don't want you to take anything in here as a context for doing a specific strategy. Definitely consult with a legal professional, an attorney, a tax attorney, before pursuing any strategy related to the content. All right, so with that out of the way, let's talk about some of the 1099 miscellaneous basics. Just a few things that you need to keep in mind about 1099s themselves. So what is a 1099 in the first place? When you think about 1099 miscellaneous forms, you think about vendors, you think about contractors. There are other scenarios like property managers who send out 1099s to property owners. There are also a variety of different 1099 forms. We're focusing strictly on the 1099 miscellaneous form. But always think about that in relationship to an actual employee. So a vendor or a contractor gets a 1099 miscellaneous form. An employee is going to get a W-2, probably coming out of your payroll service. They're going to get that W-2. So keep that distinction in mind. You're going to send a W-2 to an employee who is an ongoing person who's working for you. A vendor contractor might be somebody who's doing a single project for you, one small bit that they are working on, or it could be someone who is working with you or for you on an ongoing basis as well. The types of payment that you're providing to that vendor or contractor can vary as well. The biggest one that we see is the non-employee compensation. So that's paying someone for a task that you might otherwise have to pay an employee to do. You could think about it as people who are maybe coming in to build bookcases in your store, or maybe they're laying carpet for you, or maybe they're someone you've hired to be a computer programmer and do a job for creating your website. Lots of different ways that non-employee compensation can come into play. Rents are also a major factor in the 1099 miscellaneous form. So if you are paying rent to someone in the course of doing your business, then that is something that would be noted in box 1 of a 1099 miscellaneous form. There's gross proceeds paid to an attorney, like a settlement of a lawsuit or something like that. And then there's several other possible categories. We'll talk about one or two of them as we move forward. But primarily what you want to think of here is the 1099 miscellaneous is something that you send out as a result of your doing business. So I mentioned someone coming in and building bookcases for your bookstore. That's in the course of you doing business. That's going to help you facilitate your business process. You wouldn't pay a contractor who's coming in and maybe refinishing the kitchen in your home because that's a personal situation. It's not a business situation. So the 1099 miscellaneous is for a vendor or contractor who's performing services in the scope of you doing business and helping facilitate that. So who sends a 1099 miscellaneous? It's going to be a business, it's going to be a property manager, and there are some others specifically for some medical processing, medical payment processing. You'll see here on who gets a 1099 miscellaneous form. They call all those payees, and they could be vendors or contractors, they could be property owners, they could be attorneys, they could be fishing boat crew members. So another person who might send a 1099 out would be the owner of that fishing boat. So just a variety of people who may send and or receive a 1099 miscellaneous form. So during the course of your business, something you want to think about is, when do I need to send a 1099 miscellaneous out to a specific person? And if you're an accountant, you're helping your clients to derive that information as well. Figure out when they need to be responsible for sending a 1099 miscellaneous form. So let's talk a little bit about vendor management before we move into to Zoho Books here, because this is what we see frequently with our clients, whether they're big or small. In fact, we see this situation come up. We see the client file a 1099. So we'll talk about the way the process is supposed to work. But you've hired someone to do some contract work, you paid them, and then you send a 1099 to them at the end of the year. Eventually, you may receive a CP 2100 or CP 2100A notice back because of that, and that would indicate that you filed that 1099 with missing or incorrect taxpayer identification number and name combination. And that CP 2100 really starts a cycle where you have to send out what's called a B notice. You have to send out a W-9 with that B notice, and the B notice stands for backup withholding. The backup withholding is also noted on this slide. As you're sending out that B notice and W-9, you may be gathering and collecting information. You might be going into Zoho Books and typing in some updated information for a specific person that you have hired as a contractor. And then the backup withholding is particularly burdensome. That is a 28% withholding that you have to take out of that contractor's payments if they have not provided the taxpayer identification number, or if you received a CP 2100 or CP 2100A notice about that recipient. So that backup withholding can definitely be harmful to that person. They don't want you to take that money out. But then at the end of that year, you go back and you file another 1099. So the cycle just kind of repeats itself until you finally get a corrected statement. And there are, of course, some negative impacts to this. There's the time that you spend researching and resolving the discrepancies. There's time spent manually keying data into systems. Zoho Books is very easy to use, but you still have to go out there and actually type the data in and put it into the software, or update it if you've already had it in Zoho Books when you have found a discrepancy. There's money that you spend mailing the W-9 forms to the vendors, the B notices that have to go out to the vendors. So there's some cost associated with that. You have penalties for missing documentation. We'll discuss the penalties a little bit later as well. And then there's strain on the vendor relationship. So if this is a person you have an ongoing relationship with, you're going to be taking 28% of their pay to provide to the IRS, and they may not appreciate that. Now, it's probably their fault in the first place for providing you with the incorrect information or not providing it in the first place, but still, there can be some strain there as part of that relationship. Now, that's not to say that all of the vendors or recipients who you receive a CP 2100 notice on are doing something dishonest. There are certainly honest errors that can occur during this process. Small vendors, small companies often don't know what they're supposed to enter on a W-9. They don't fill these out on a daily basis, so they may not be very aware of what they are supposed to include on a W-9. And so oftentimes they're putting something like a doing business as name into that form, rather than putting their actual legal entity name into the W-9 form. Handwritten W-9 forms can cause some data entry errors. I know my handwriting in particular is terrible, so if I filled out a W-9 by hand, it may not even be legible to the person who's translating it and putting it into Zoho Books on the other end. And then individuals who are using an SSN rather than an EIN on their W-9 form, they may be supplying a name on the W-9 form, but that name may be slightly incorrect. It may be that they've been married or divorced and just haven't followed up with the Social Security Administration to actually make the update in their records. And so they're putting what they feel is correct, but it might not actually be correct. So here's what businesses should do, and if you're an accountant or a bookkeeper on the line who's listening to this as well, your businesses, small businesses that you work with, should be following a good process here as well. Anytime that you're hiring someone to do work for you, someone that you may have to supply a 1099 for, you always want to collect a W-9 first. The W-9 form is something that's available either online from the IRS, or you can work with a third-party provider to provide that form. It's a pretty standard form, and it just collects the taxpayer identification number. It collects the name, again, the legal entity name of that person that you're doing business with, collects their address, it collects their corporation type, if they are a corporation type, or if they're just an individual sole proprietor type. So it collects all that information. Then that information is placed into your accounting software, your Zoho Books, so that that can be resting there while you're continuing this process and beginning to receive bills from and pay out to those recipients. The 10 match is the next step in this process, though. So when you get the W-9, it doesn't end there. You want to keep that W-9 on file so you have it as a backup for any issue that may arise in the future. But the IRS offers a service where you can go and you can set up an account and you can validate the taxpayer identification number and name combination and ensure that what the person has presented to you on the W-9 is legitimate and correct. And you want to do that because there are, again, penalties that can arise from this, and you just want to avoid that whole CP 2100 and B notice process that you may otherwise have to go through. And then at the end of the tax year, of course, you are going to be filing the 1099, and that kind of wraps up this process. But if you're being proactive along the way here, that 1099 piece actually becomes much easier. You don't have to worry about getting those negative notes from the IRS, the CP 2100 notices, and potentially having penalties and such to pay based off of that when you go through and do your 1099 filing. So just some best practices to keep in mind. Collect the W-9 immediately, store it for future reference, because if you do collect a W-9 from a vendor and then later it turns out that they had provided incorrect information on that W-9, the IRS comes and penalizes you, they do have an abatement process. So if you have validation, verification that you have filed a 1099 with the information that you collected and assumed was correct because a person signed it, they will be a little bit more lenient. They do, although they still want you to do the 10 match process, and so that is sitting there in the fourth bullet point that you see there, verifying the 10 and name combination through the IRS. Also, if you are working with a vendor who says, no, I'm not going to give you my social or my EIN, I'm not giving you anything like that, start that backup withholding. Withhold the 28% from their pay because otherwise you could be on the hook for that backup withholding that you have potentially failed to withhold from that recipient. And then validating the taxpayer identification number and name through that IRS database before issuing the payment. It's just always a good thing to make sure that everything is squared away with your data. So e-filing. So there are a couple of different ways that you can process the 1099 forms and make those forms available to your recipients as well as to the IRS. Paper forms are what many people are familiar with. You go to Staples, you buy a pack of forms, or you order them from an office supply store and have them delivered, and you kind of finagle them through your printer. Make sure you've got all the boxes lined up exactly right, and go in and do the paper manual process. You can also e-file with IRS, and there are large enterprises that do this e-filing themselves. They pay a team of developers to build out the file and test and submit it to the IRS and make sure that everything is good there. But you also can work with someone else like Tax 1099 to provide that e-file service for you. One of the advantages there is that you do get an extra month to make any modifications before the file goes to the IRS. So there are different deadlines, and we'll cover the deadlines a little bit later. But the paper filing deadline to send your information to the IRS is the end of February, so it's a leap year, so that would be February 29th this year. But the file deadline is all the way back to March 31st. So you get an extra month to make sure you've got all that information correct, to give your vendors and recipients time to receive those 1099s and come back and say if there's any discrepancies in those forms that they need to take care of, and provide an updated form to them if you do validate that they've maybe been paid the wrong amount, or their address is wrong, or anything like that that might need to be modified on that form. The IRS has a threshold for e-filing, and it's 250 form. So if you have 250 or more vendors who would be receiving 1099 forms or W-2s for that matter, you have to e-file. That doesn't process, or that doesn't it doesn't apply to a lot of small businesses. The vast majority of businesses are hiring many fewer than that. But the IRS encourages everyone to do the e-filing, and primarily they do it because it makes their life easier. I know we're probably not all keen on making the IRS's life easier, but it is something that that they do encourage businesses to do, is e-file, because you can think about it from the IRS's perspective. If they receive on February 28th millions of paper copies of forms, they have to take each one of those forms, scan it into their internal systems. They have to go through and kind of test each one to make sure that the data that they scanned actually hit the right boxes on the IRS website system, and really just put a lot of manual effort into that. So that's why they have an earlier deadline for those paper filings. So e-filing gets you a little bit more time to make sure your data is correct. There's no 1096 when you e-file. The e-file replaces that. So if you're doing paper forms for 1099s, you have to submit what's called a transmittal, a 1096 form, along with that when you send it to the IRS. And that form is a summary of the information that's contained in the rest of the 1099s that you send out to your recipients. That 1096 can be, again, problematic. When you buy a package of the forms, you only get 2 or 3 of the 1096 forms, and so if you make any mistakes at all, you're wasting one of those. And then if you need to do corrected filings later in the year, you have to have a 1096 available to send with the 1099 miscellaneous as well. And then e-filing, generally speaking, requires no pre-printed forms to buy. So you can print out the recipient copies on plain white paper. You don't have to finagle with your printer to line everything up, and you do get the electronic filing piece of that as well, which has the previous advantages there. Electronic delivery of statements to recipients is a question that we get a lot as well. So generally speaking, in kind of the old school way of doing things, applies to W-2s, it applies to 1099s, it applies to any form that goes to someone reporting IRS information. Those have generally been handled on paper. So in the first part of February, if you are a vendor contractor yourself, maybe you're an accountant, you might get lots of different 1099 forms from all of your clients throughout the course of the year. You may even be sending them to yourself. But those 1099 forms and W-2s generally come on paper, and so they just stack up on your counter, on your desk, and wait for you to go through and do your tax filing for the year. The IRS does allow e-statements, electronic statements, to be set up and delivered to recipients, as long as the recipient has consented to receive that form electronically. So if you work for a company that has an online portal, they may have asked for you to go out and accept that your W-2 will be delivered electronically, and then you can download a copy of that form. So it is perfectly acceptable for an e-statement, an electronic statement, to be sent to a recipient, as long as that recipient has consented to receive it. And then the third bullet point, there are many forms that payees receive are substitute statements. So the IRS has very specific formatting requirements that you might expect. And those formatting requirements for the paper forms are just extraordinarily specific. What they do allow, though, is for businesses, and this could be us, it could be Staples, it could be anyone, to create what they call a substitute statement, even if it's delivered via paper or electronically, as long as it has the pertinent information in a readable format for that recipient. It is something that can be provided to that recipient, and you'll see that in a lot of people who provide 1099 and W-2 forms. Regarding the consent requirements, so the recipient that you want to send an electronic statement to, they have to accept in the affirmative that they are willing to accept that electronic statement from you, rather than getting a paper copy delivered via mail. They have to do that electronically, so you have to send them the request the same way that they're going to get that electronic form. It could be email, or it could be through the portal that I mentioned previously that some employers use for W-2s, or some companies use for their vendor contractors as well. If there's any hardware or software changes, if you have been using PDF as the type of downloadable form that they had, and you change to something else, you have to notify them of that, and then get a new consent after any different software might be installed there. Prior to furnishing statements, just know that a paper copy can be provided to the recipient if they don't consent. So you might have 10 vendors and 5 of them say, yeah, I'd be happy to get an electronic form. I don't want any more paper on my desk. And they take them. But then the other 5 say, no, I want to get the paper. And so you do have still the opportunity to send that paper copy out to them if they do not assent. You have to list the scope and the duration of that consent. Is it an ongoing consent? Are you only doing it for 1 year? Are you doing it for 2 years? And then how they could get a paper copy if they wanted one, and how they can stop getting electronic copies if they need to. So these are just items that you have to take into account as you're thinking about providing these electronic statements out to a recipient. You don't have to do this for the IRS, by the way. This is just on the recipient side, furnishing recipient statements to those people that you've paid. If you decide to no longer perform them, to provide them electronically, you provide a notice of termination, and if they need to update their address or their social security number or name or anything like that, you have to have a procedure in place for them to update you with that information. You describe the hardware and software, and then you give them a date that statement will no longer be available electronically. And generally speaking, the IRS requires that be posted through October the 15th. So you can see on here that they have to provide that through October the 15th for them to be available. That's because anybody who is filing their taxes may apply for an automatic extension, and sometimes that would be a full 6 months. Sometimes it's 5 months, depending on the type of extension they're filing. But that would carry through at least October 15th, and that's why the IRS mandates that if you provide an electronic statement, it has to be provided up through October 15th. It has to be available up through October 15th. It has to be posted to that site by January 31st. Now, January 31st is the IRS deadline for getting those recipient statements out, whether it's postmarked in the mail or electronically delivered. However, this year, January 31st falls on a Sunday, so they push it back 1 business day to Monday, February the 1st. So just keep that in mind as you're kind of angling towards the end of the season, going through January here. You have 1 extra day, one more weekend where you can get those forms out in the mail or electronically to your recipients. You got to tell the people that they're there, so inform the recipient of the posting and let them know how they can access and print that. And some more best practices. So if you are choosing to electronically deliver your statements out, make sure you keep all their consent. Make sure you have that trackable where you can report on it and provide it to the IRS. Say yes, this person opted in to receive electronic format, or this person opted out and requires to receive paper. Make sure you've got the procedures for doing all that outlined and clearly and cleanly, so that you can follow them quickly and have no kind of questions about whether or not you are within your own you are compliant with your own process. Make sure your contact information is kept up to date on the statements. So you are required to provide your business name, your EIN, your address on the statements that you're sending out to recipients, whether they're paper or electronic. You're also required to provide a contact phone number so that people who receive those statements, if they have questions about them, if they say, no, I think this amount's wrong, or my address has changed, or whatever, they have an easy way to contact your business and let you know about those changes. Maintain paper copies to send when needed. That can be easy or hard depending on how you have typically been filing these forms. And then make sure you're providing those forms in a timely manner. Always keep the deadlines in mind. And again, we'll see the deadlines here in just a moment. These are the deadlines for the 2015 tax season. So we just completed 2015. Happy New Year, everyone. We just completed 2015. These are the deadlines that you need to meet. And we've already talked about the February 1st, 2016 deadline for the recipient copies to be postmarked or e-delivered. And for those mailed copies, that is a postmark date. It doesn't have to be received by the recipient on February 1st, 2016. It has to be postmarked and put in the mail on or before February 1st, 2016. If you are doing paper forms, so you're going through that paper process and sending the 1096 out, that 1096 and the IRS A copy has to be postmarked by February 29th, 2016. Usually it's the last day of February, so February 29th, 2016 is the date there. And then the e-file returns are March 31st, 2016. So those are just the deadlines to keep in mind as you're moving forward and looking at your 1099 miscellaneous forms and thinking about processing them for this year. I also put in some information here about penalties, not to scare anybody, but just to kind of put it out there. The penalties have gone over the last 6 or 7 years. They've gone from a maximum of $30 to a maximum of $100, and now to a maximum of $250 as part of the Affordable Care Act. So you can see what the penalties are here, and these are penalty amounts per form. So if you fail to file or furnish the forms within 30 days of the deadline, that's a $50 each penalty up to $500,000. Fail to file or furnish by August 1st, it's $100 up to $1.5 million, and failure to file or furnish at all is $250 with a maximum of $3 million, and then an incorrect filing is $250 with a maximum of $3 million. And those maximums can be adjusted downward for smaller businesses, which the IRS has defined as under $5 million gross receipts. They have smaller maximums, and basically those maximums are half of what you see here. So still a pretty significant chunk of change there. If you have a bunch of incorrect filings, your maximum penalty would be $1.5 million at $250 each. So it can be very, very intense process and very detrimental to your business if you do face these penalties, either for failing to file or filing with incorrect information. All right, so what we're going to do next is move over into Zoho Books. We're going to take a look at Zoho Books and talk about some of the items that that you can do inside of Zoho Books to make your life a little bit easier in regards to tracking and managing your vendors. So we're going to look at setting up the vendors. There are a couple of specific items that you need to make sure you're doing there, including tracking payments as 1099 payments if you are going to be providing a 1099 to a specific person. We're going to look at creating a bill, making payments, and then setting up the 1099 report, and you'll see why that's important as we kind of go through to make sure you've got everything squared away and set up correctly. And I was in Contacts when I was kind of working in here before. So Contacts is where you go to create these vendors that are working or that are working for you, that you're providing payment to. You can just click on the plus button there to add a new vendor in, and you can go through the process of creating that vendor. There's also a new option there for setting that vendor up. You put in their information here, all the information that's required, and you can see what's necessary there. The vendor piece is important here, as well as down here at the bottom, tracking the 1099 payment. So if this is someone that you're going to need to issue a 1099 to at the end of the year, you always want to make sure you're checking that box, and you can put in their taxpayer identification number here as well. So you can put in their EIN, their SSN, or what have you for their specific information. And by the way, you're getting this from their W-9. So we talked earlier about always collecting the W-9 from the recipient. This is how you know what their taxpayer identification number is, what their name is. You can put in their address for tracking their information as well. Let me actually turn that off because I think it's expecting me to enter something there now. I can click here, put in their address as well to make sure that I've got that 1099 going to the right person. And again, all that is on that W-9 form that you're looking at, and you're having those vendors complete. Then you'll have a full list of all of your vendors here. Now, obviously, mine are all test people because we don't use this account that we do demonstrations for actual payments. But if I go into one of these vendors, you can see what that looks like. I've got their primary contact details. I can go in and edit that vendor, and that really brings up the same information that we saw before. So I can go in, I can put in a test email, or excuse me, a contact email address. I can make sure that my 1099 payments are on or off for a specific person. So if I turn that on, I can put in, again, their EIN and such for that vendor. I also have the ability here to go in and add new transactions. And so if you're putting in bills here, this is something that that you want to pay out. You put in your bill number, you put in everything for creating that bill, any reference notes that you have and such, and you go through the process of adding that bill in. You can also go through here in that same place and pay the bill. So later time you can go through and you can put in that payment that you've made to that person. You might have a net 30-day process with them, or whatever you have for processing that payment out to the recipient. All that is available, and in fact it's built right in here for you. Pretty easy to use here in Zoho Books to go through the process of making sure you've got your bills and your payments all taken care of in one clean place there for your vendor processing, making sure that everything is kosher there, and it's going to be processed out correctly. Now, as you go through this process, I'm just going to go back to my contacts. As you go through this, you're doing this throughout the year. So we kind of compress everything for demonstration purposes. But you might be adding the vendor in January and doing a bill in February and doing a payment in March. It just kind of goes throughout the year as you're going through. And you always want to stay on top of that. So if you're working with a bookkeeper or an accountant, they're probably pretty good at pestering you to stay up on your game there, making sure you're getting all your data entered. And that's because at the end of the year, in the reports menu here, you're going to go in and you're going to set up your 1099 report inside of Zoho Books. And so you can establish the year that you want to work on. And I'm doing 2015 because we're in 2016 now. We're always processing tax forms for the prior year. And you can put in here specific rules. So I'm just going to click this add new rule. And what I do here is I select one of my accounts that I've been making payments out of. And it could be any of these specific accounts that you see here. So I've already got those in here. I'm going to select it anyway. Consultant expense. And then what you do is you say, for any of my consultant expenses, they're going to be considered non-employee compensation. And you can see in some of my other examples here, I've got a rent expense. That's going to box 1 on the 1099 miscellaneous form for my rents. So I'm going to actually delete that one that I just created there. And you can see other expenses I've got here listed as gross proceeds paid to attorney. You just set it up however you want that form to work and however you want to report this information to the IRS. And it's important. And I'm saying however you want it to work, but you do need to make sure that you're in compliance, and your accountant or bookkeeper can help you with this to make sure that you have all of them mapped the right way, all of your payments going to the right place. You generate the report, and I've already got one down here, but you can see here for year 2015, I have 2 contacts that I made payments for, and you can see their names here. You can also see that this one's missing a little bit of information that I might want to go back and add. And then you can see where I made payments to that vendor. So this one got paid in box 7, $600, and there is a threshold there, $600 for each one of these. And you can see here that there's just a handy way of checking inside of Zoho Books to see what those thresholds are for each one of the different boxes. And then this person is actually a little bit different. I got 2 different types of payments. I got rents, so maybe $1,000 a month times 12 months, and then I got non-employee compensation going for that person as well. So all of this is what should be appearing on my 1099s. And if I were doing 1099s myself, I would have to kind of go through. I'd have to find this vendor. I'd have to go in and put in all their information, type it all into my manual form, and I go through the process of entering this specific payment amount in the right box. So it's all here for you to do that paper process if that's how you choose to do that processing. What we're going to suggest today, though, is that you work with Zoho Books and Tax 1099 to maybe streamline that process, make it a little bit easier for you. So I'm going to go log into my Tax 1099 account here, and you can see just to the right of this login screen that there is a sign-up method, and there's no cost to sign up for an account. You can go in and create an account, and we don't charge anything until you start to do your processing. But I'm going to go in, I'm going to log in with my user ID and password. So I created that over here earlier, and I've got a user ID and password. I'm going to go in, and what I'm going to do is focus specifically on getting these forms out the door as soon as I possibly can. So I'm going to go into Imports, and I'm going to go into Zoho Books. And I'm going to connect my Zoho Books account with my Tax 1099 account. And I can do this for prior years, so if I needed to go back and do some filings from a previous year, I'm available to do that. I'm going to start a new import here, and I'm going to enter in my Zoho Books login information. It's actually going to just read it over since I'm logged into the same browser window in Zoho Books. Actually, just going to bring that straight over here for me inside of Tax 1099. And so I can see here, this is my company name from Zoho Books, Tax 1099. Zoho Tax 1099 is my company name. I can see that here. And then here's those 2 vendors. I've got vendor 1 with the $600, and I've got vendor 2, who's Zoho Integration Testing, with that $12,000 and the $7,000. So all of it just came right over here for me to work on. Now, in the Zoho Books report that we showed you a moment ago, I'm going to go back there for a second, but in that Zoho Books report that we showed you, it pulled some information that was missing from Zoho Integration Testing. It said country and email address are missing. We do some validation on our end too, so when the data comes over to us, we go through and look at each one of those vendors, and we say if they're missing any data or not that's required data. So you'll see this missing, invalid, required data. So if I look at Zoho integration testing, we default everyone to United States of America if there's not one there, but the email address was missing too. That, however, is not a required field from the IRS. So you have to have the EIN, the name, the address, and so on. You don't have to have an email address, and so we don't mark that as necessary. If there were something that we're missing, though, let's say the name was missing, or there was no taxpayer identification number, then we would mark that as missing and invalid data. And in fact, you can see here on my payer, on my company level, I do have something that's missing. So if I go in and I click that, I'm going to see real quickly here that I'm missing the city, the state, and the zip code for my actual company that I have set up over in Zoho Books. So I'm just going to put that information in here, and we're headquartered in Fayetteville, Arkansas, so that's what I'm going to put in here, and I'll update that information. Oh, and phone number, as I mentioned, is required, so you do have to have a phone number for those people to contact you back. I'm going to put in a phone number there, and when I click update, it's going to process that over, and it will save that data here inside of Tax 1099. Now, I do still need to go back if I wanted to fix that in Zoho Books and go back and fix that in Zoho Books so I don't get that next year as well, but that will apply that to each one of the forms that I've created here. All right, so if I look at this and I saw something was wrong, I can go through and I can edit those amounts in those boxes as well. I can change some of these over to different boxes if I need to. But the idea here is that you've taken care of this in Zoho. You looked at your report when you got your Zoho Books report up. You took a look at that. You said, yep, everything looks correct there. And then you initiate the import process. I'm going to select these forms, and I'm going to move them in so that I can go through and actually finalize this process and actually submit these forms to the IRS and get them out the door for my recipients. So I got 2 records that were updated successfully. You're actually going to see some more here because I did this import back in November as well. So I could even delete this one out of here if I wanted to get rid of that specific one. But these are the 2 that I went through and I made, excuse me, that I went through and I made today. You can see the date there. You can also see that we mask that taxpayer identification number so it doesn't display. So that recipient, if they've used a social or an EIN, we're only going to show the last 4 digits of that on any of the forms that we send out. And then you just click next and go through the payment process. You can choose to have us do the postal mailing if you want us to do that. You can email them out again if they've got consent. And then we do the 10 match that I mentioned before, and we also do state filing for you. So if you are in a state that participates in the combined federal state filing, then we do that automatically. But if you are in somewhere like Pennsylvania or Oregon that requires some additional forms there to be sent, we can do that, and that would show up over here. And also, I should point out that you see this schedule date, March 31st, 2016. All of our forms are going to be scheduled automatically to go on that e-file delivery date. So we're going to send out the forms to the vendors here as soon as possible. So if you asked us to do mailing, we put those in the mail the next business day. But for the IRS e-file piece, we're going to push that back until March 31st, and that's going to give you the option to come in here and edit these forms. Let's say that vendor 1 called you and said, hey, my taxpayer identification number is wrong. And you could come in and you can fix that right away and have your e-file updated, and it won't go until March 31st, and it will be correct in that March 31st. So let's look at that a little bit. So let's say that I click next and I went through and paid. Now, I'm not going to do these because they're not real forms, but let's say I went through my process and I paid for those forms. Now, if I wanted to, I can have Tax 1099 do the mailing for me, or if I want to, I can go through and do the mailing myself. So I'm just going to pick a previous instance that I've done here as a test example. I've got a company here, I've got the tax year, and we do keep these year after year after year for you, so you can do all these things for prior year forms as well. But you can see here I've got all these people out here who I've processed 1099s for. This is what the form copy is going to look like. It just prints on plain white paper. You don't have to buy any pre-printed forms or anything special. It's just plain white paper. You've got your address or your client's address if you're an accountant or bookkeeper. You've got the recipient address. This is that masked social security number or EIN, and you've got the amounts that have been paid. They've got 2 amounts in boxes 1 and box 7, and then at the bottom you've got all the instructions that typically go. So you can print this and mail it yourself. Just fold it in half and put it in a double window number 10 envelope, or you could even hand them out to your people. So if these are people who are coming on site on a day-to-day basis, you could even print them out and hand them out to your contractors or vendors. So they're all right there and available. You can also email them out through this window as well. And I mentioned the editing. So if you did have a discrepancy that was reported, you could go in and you could edit submit that form, as easy as coming in here and typing in any changes that you might need. So if they moved their address, or if they were filing under a social security number or had an amount discrepancy, you can update any of those. When you hit the save button, it's going to save those changes, and it will display those changes in the 1099 form, that PDF form, and will automatically update so that on March 31st it will go out with that specific information. We've talked about W-9s a little bit, and there's also the ability to send out the W-9s from inside here. So as long as you have the name and the email address for that person that you've hired to do that work, you can go in and you can actually just submit that W-9 and have them complete that online here and process it. Process it online. All the information will stack up here in Tax 1099. You still need to go back to Zoho Books though and make sure that you've got that information entered successfully in that contact area in Zoho Books. Because one thing that we don't do is we don't push the data back to Zoho Books. It is coming directly from Zoho Books to Tax 1099. So any changes that are made in Tax 1099 would then need to be taken back over to Zoho Books and applied in Zoho Books as well. So you could even go to Zoho Books initially and make the change there, and then integrate the information over as we saw just a moment ago. A couple of other things that are here. Whenever you bring your company in, or if you're an accountant, your clients in, we create records there. We store the payers and the recipients on here for you, so you've got access to all of them going forward. We store those forms again for multiple years out there, a minimum of 4 years, but we do archive things for a minimum of 7 years. So we'll keep those records for you in case you get audited or need to provide that information. So you can see here, these are the recipient records, and again the W-9s and such are available here, and these are 10 matches that have been rejected because these aren't real people. So the IRS database rejected them, said they were not real people, they were not accurate. And then there's reports out here as well, so you can come in, you can pull the report. So for example, if you wanted to make sure your information was the same in Zoho Books, you could pull a recipient report, and you could go back and take that Excel form back to Zoho Books and just make sure that everything was correct and reported successfully over there. And then like Zoho Books, we offer support. So we have a knowledge base where you can go find articles. We have a toll-free number. We have an email address. We have a live chat. So all that is available here for you if you do have questions about using the tool. All right, so I think that might be all the questions that we've gotten out here so far. So I think we may be ready to wrap up the session.